Now we're going to move forward and talk about something very, very important and crucial, which is the fact that we do have a few companies that own the entire internet. And it's not a good place. It's not a good place we're living in, because if you're a YouTuber, you don't own your subscribers. If you're a merchant on Amazon, you don't own your customers. So there's always this middleman in between you and your end clients, your end users, which at the end of the day leads to a very dystopian future. And that is why it is my big pleasure to introduce to you Matthew Spoke from Aon. And recently they did rebrand to Open Application Network. So they're no longer Aon anymore when it comes to their technical platform. It's also important to note that they recently upgraded from proof of work to a hybrid consensus solution, and they're really now pushing forward to bring decentralization technologies to normal software companies, so that we're not only building solutions for ourselves. Because in many cases, you do see blockchain being closed, and you do see this whole industry being just by crypto people, for crypto people. But these guys are really pushing adoption outside of crypto. So that being said, a big, big applause for Matthew Spoke from Open Application Network. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks, Ivan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's obviously a great pleasure to be back in Singapore. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about sort of what Ivan introduced to you conceptually, and something I'm going to call, for all intents and purposes, the unintended consequences of platforms. I spent a lot of time over the last 5 years at crypto conferences. We spent a lot of time talking about the benefits and differences between our technology roadmaps and other people's technology roadmaps. But I think where we've kind of fallen short as an industry is understanding, what are the problems that we're trying to address. What are the real-world pain points that real companies and real consumers are facing on a daily basis? And how do we bring the best and brightest of our technological solutions to address some of those problems? So over the last 6 months or so, and for those of you who follow the Aon project, you would have seen last week that we released and announced our new go-to-market strategy called the Open Application Network. But over the last 6 months, we spent a lot of time trying to understand and research what are the pain points and problems facing the largest online platform operators today. And when I say online platform operators, I mean companies like Uber, companies like YouTube, companies like Shopify and Facebook and others, and really start to develop a narrative and a perspective around how can we bring our technology to address real problems among these companies. But before I get there, I want to kind of give you a little step back. When we started to analyze where we stood in the industry, one thing that kind of stood out to us, we had a conversation with one of our investors maybe 4 months ago, and he said this to me. He said, I understand and believe in Bitcoin and Ethereum, but everything else feels like a copycat playing the exact same game. And this was very true to us. If you're building a layer 1 blockchain protocol today, you generally are somewhere in a directly competing field with Bitcoin or Ethereum, whether you like to admit it or not. You've just built a slightly nuanced version of their roadmaps. And we understand that these two protocols specifically have very clearly articulated what problem they're trying to solve in the world. So if you're familiar with Bitcoin, then the problem that you're likely excited about is that maybe fiat money is a manipulated form of currency, and maybe as a result of that, we need an alternative. If you're familiar with Ethereum, then you probably fundamentally believe that the internet stack is too centralized and we need to build something alternative that potentially redistributes the wealth and power of the internet. And so these things became the fundamental investment theses of Bitcoin and state-free money, and Ethereum and the decentralized internet. And now, if you think across your portfolio of projects that you've invested in, to the extent you're invested in layer 1 protocols, you're likely invested in these two buckets. But what nobody was talking about was, what are the existing problems of real platform companies today? How do we build a technological roadmap and solution set that addresses these problems? And this led us to a very, very wide open gap of a new type of protocol that needed to be built. So I'm going to start by walking you through 3 very quick examples of what I mean by the problems that these platform companies have. And they have 3 very distinct problems that are very broad and very impactful. One of them is the concept of ownership. When interacting on a platform like Shopify, who owns the customer? Is it the merchant? Is it the company? Is it the app developer that builds plugins? Who owns the liability over data management? Who owns the compliance requirements? There's a very different set of rules depending on what platform you operate in, and it's very, very unclear. And this has led to a huge amount of misalignment of stakeholder incentives. Is this my problem to solve as Uber, or is this your problem to solve as the driver? Is this my problem to solve as DoorDash, or should I leave employee benefits to the individual bike delivery person to figure out for themselves? And so as more and more of these stakeholder misalignments have become clear, you started to see frictions evolve and become significantly more like mainstream awareness inside of these platform economies. And finally, this led to a very obvious realization by us that there's often a lack of basic things built inside these ecosystems that we call common goods, because it's in nobody's best interest to build these things. If I go back to the DoorDash example, you'll probably, if you're from California, you would know this. All of these individual delivery people that do bike delivery for food have been trying to organize unions demanding employee health benefits, because the companies that they operate for will not provide them health benefits because it's not in their economic best interest to do it. That's what I would call a common good, a big gap that exists inside of these platform economies. So when we started to spend more time understanding these three problems, we then realized that we needed to build a new category of solutions, a category of solutions that we call open applications. And this is not just a nuanced twist on what the industry has called decentralized apps. I think this is the difference between saying, I don't like YouTube, so I'm going to build decentralized YouTube, to saying, I don't like YouTube, so I want to build extendable features that talk to YouTube, that connect to its APIs, and that build a richer and wealthier experience for its users. Taking advantage of the network effects that exist in these companies today and these marketplaces today, and then building apps that talk directly to their underlying APIs. And this is what we built when we launched last week, the Open Application Network. And I'll tell you a couple of examples of what you can build on top of this. But effectively, we're trying to build a narrative around why the next platform companies are going to be built very different. They're not going to be built like the Uber of the past. They're not going to be built like the Amazon of the past. They're going to be built in a way that kind of reconcentrates all of the value around the end user, around the end customer, around the end merchant, around the end app developer, and takes away some of the monopolistic power that exists in a lot of these online marketplaces. The Open Application Network is still a public utility. It's a system that needs to be economically incentivized, and in this case, it's incentivized by its digital asset called Aon. And so for those of you who've been following our news or even saw the panel earlier today, you know that we're doing this by upgrading our system to a hybrid proof of work and proof of stake system, where you can mine the system for security and you can stake the system for security. And so this has been kind of the way that we've now approached the market, saying we're going to go into the market talking to developers outside of the crypto industry about how they can build open applications that connect to the largest and most valuable ecosystems in the world, that connect to Uber, that connect to Shopify, that connect to Twitch, and build really interesting solutions at the intersection of what can I build on a public infrastructure and what can I build off of Uber's API, for example. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. What can I build with this type of protocol? So we launched, and we're in the process of kind of completing our roadmap against 4 distinct tools. These are SDKs, effectively, a set of APIs and libraries that allow you to build use cases in 4 verticals. One we call open economy, open governance, open funding, and open identity. These ideas are effectively borrowing from the best design solutions we've seen in the Web3 industry, but repackaging them in a way that are really easy and non-blockchain specific for a normal app developer, an iOS developer, a Slack bot developer to interact with and tie into the way that they built their business. So within these SDKs is pre-built and managed key management, is pre-built and deployed smart contracts. It's the ability for somebody to very easily define the logic and deploy a feature to their application without having to be an expert blockchain developer. So what can you do on top of this? And I'll give you an example of a product that we're in the process of launching that effectively is something we built with our Open Economy Kit. And this is something that internally we've been calling Open Slack, but it's a good demonstration of what I could do on top of a platform like Slack. With Open Slack, an app developer who is familiar with building a Slack bot could very easily build something as simple as, I want to build a Slack bot that allows me to reward every one of my engineering staff every time they make a GitHub commit. So to do that, I'm interfacing with the GitHub API that says when a commit goes into this repository, I capture an event, and on the back of that, I generate an asset and I distribute it to an account or an address being held by one of my engineers. In this case, all of that is done through the Slack interface. Slack effectively becomes the wallet. It becomes the place where people can interact and transfer coins or assets or badges or rewards. But what's best about this, because it's built on the Open Economy Kit, is that I can actually extract that reward or asset from Slack, and I can move it over to another interface. I can then redeem it, let's say, on a Shopify store as a discount to a purchase. that happens to be my merch store where I can buy sweaters with my brand or whatever the use cases might be. You know, Ivan and I were jamming on this backstage a little bit. He's a very well-known YouTuber, and one of the distinct problems that he faces is he doesn't own the relationship between him and his subscribers. So how do I build an experience for a YouTuber to be able to augment their use of that platform? Something that would allow them the ability to own that relationship even if they decided to leave YouTube and go stream on Twitch one day. And that's something that's completely impossible today until we introduce something like the Open Application Network. So obviously Slack is one really powerful example. It's an interface that developers are familiar with and consumers are familiar with, but it's only one of hundreds of interfaces. Interfaces that are, you know, application marketplaces that everybody would be familiar with because we use these things every day in our lives. So how do I build experiences that connect with all of these brands and more? What we want to find over the course of the next 6 months is entrepreneurs that are willing to solve platform problems in a completely different way. So we're going after two very distinct segments of the market. We're going after these companies, but we're also going after companies that integrate with these companies. So app developers that build into the Google Marketplace, app developers that build extensions to the Uber app, or app developers that are, you know, ambitiously trying to become the next Amazon, and making sure we catch these entrepreneurs and developers at a time where we can introduce to them a new way of building an application that kind of puts user control back at the center of their design. So this is where we're going with the Open Application Network. We're obviously super excited about this. We've had an enormously positive reception over the last week and a half since we announced and launched this. And over the course of 2020, we're really excited to show you the types of products and companies that we're already in the process of working with. So stay tuned for more. I would love to talk to you. We're just upstairs at the booth. So thank you very much. Have a good day.